Forget Me Not. Written by J.L. Smith. We promised to love each other forever. We said that if anything ever happened to one of us, the other would never forget how much in love we were. But that was when we were younger, and we all know how those things go. We grew up and grew apart, and I guess at some point maybe I forgot the promise. She didn't forget. I married Amy, my college sweetheart, 6 months ago. We were so happy. We'd been engaged since the summer before senior year, even though our parents had practically begged us to wait. But we knew we were in love and had no doubts about spending the rest of our lives together. We had the wedding in the fall after graduation and honeymooned over the holidays in Hawaii. The best wedding gift we received came from my parents upon our return to the mainland. Our very own house in my hometown. It was great. We moved out of our small apartment near campus and into our new house back home right away. Our life together was starting out perfectly. I got a bit of shocking news not long after we settled in. I was home alone, about to make myself some lunch, when there was a knock at the front door. When I answered, I had to take a beat. The teenage girl who stood on the welcome mat holding a small brown gift bag was familiar to me, but I couldn't immediately place her. I finally realized who she was when she smiled and said, "Hi, Gregor." Other than my parents, the only person who ever insisted on calling me by my full first name was my ex-girlfriend, Jennifer's kid sister, Susanna. She said it was more interesting than plain old Greg. As I greeted her, I thought back and realized that the last time I'd seen her was before I left for college, before I'd ended things with Jennifer. "It's so good to see you," I said, offering a friendly hug. She said the same, and I invited her inside. As I led the way into the living room, making small talk, I had to wonder why my ex's kid sister was coming to see me. Of course, there was a small part of me that prayed it wasn't to try and convince me to see Jen. After all, the breakup wasn't exactly mutual, and the last time I'd seen her, she was sobbing on her front porch as I walked out of her life. Nevertheless, I played the gracious host, offering food and drink, asking Susie to make herself at home. I really was happy to see her, though given how I'd left things with her sister, I wasn't sure how she or her parents had felt about me afterward. We talked catch-up for a bit. She asked about college and how I was doing, and I told her that college had been fun and married life was great, which felt just a bit awkward given the circumstances. I asked how school was going and if she knew what she was going to do after senior year, and she said school was going good, all A's and B's, but she wasn't sure yet. Maybe college, maybe a year off since she still lived at home. I was on the verge of asking about Jen, not wanting to seem like I was avoiding the topic, when Susie finally got to her reason for coming to see me. She offered me the small bag she'd been holding. I couldn't believe it. I gave Susie a hug and again told her how nice it was to see her, then said goodbye. After I closed the door, I fell against it, nearly dropping the gift she had brought me. It was a framed black and white photo of Jennifer, one that I'd taken while we were still together. In it, she was so happy, smiling and laughing, with a light shadow over the left half of her face and the warm afternoon spring sun to her right. It had been my favorite picture of her. "Why are you giving it to me?" I'd asked. Susie had taken a shuddering breath, and I'd noticed her eyes were watering. "She would have wanted you to have it." Then she'd explained. Jennifer had taken her own life about 6 months past, about a week after the wedding. Hearing the news had knocked the wind out of me, and I'd really only heard half of whatever else Susie had said. I'd known Jen had taken the breakup hard, had kept calling me for weeks afterward, but when the calls eventually stopped, I'd figured she was finally able to move on. I couldn't believe that she would kill herself over me marrying someone else, nor had Susie stated outright that that was the reason. She hadn't been in any way accusatory and seemed genuinely happy to see me again, despite the reason for the visit. I did my best not to dwell on thoughts and feelings of guilt, and it's not that I didn't feel awful for Jennifer. I really had loved her once. But should I really blame myself? I couldn't get Jennifer out of my head. A few days after Susanna's visit, I decided to pay my respects. I'd thought about doing it the day after I got the news, but wasn't sure if I should. Of course, there was the fear of running into Jen's parents. After all, being so soon after the tragedy, I was certain they probably still visited quite often. Most people would. Amy was out running some errands, so I went to the cemetery alone. I stopped by the local flower shop on my way, and after about 20 minutes of chatting with the owner, old Mrs. Crowley, I walked out with a bouquet of forget-me-nots, Jen's favorite flower. When I got to the cemetery, I parked and just sat in the car for several minutes. The scent of the flowers was cloying, but I needed a moment. I had a feeling like I didn't know what to say, but what the hell would I say to my dead ex-girlfriend anyway? I'd told myself I had no reason to feel guilty, but didn't I? No matter how I tried to spin it, Jen had killed herself because I dumped her, because I moved on and fell in love with someone else. I hadn't told Amy about any of it, nor had I shown her the gift from Susie. I'd put it away in a footlocker and shoved it under my side of the bed. And it wasn't because I wanted to hide anything from my wife, but because I didn't want to burden her with the knowledge that the girl I dated before her had killed herself because of us. Susie had told me Jennifer was buried beneath a weeping willow tree in the northeast section of the cemetery. When I found her grave, I saw that her parents had given her a nice granite headstone, the kind with her photograph on it. It only took me a moment to realize that the photo they'd used was the same one I'd taken. On that day, we'd had a picnic, listening to music on my car radio, and spent hours kissing and cuddling on the picnic blanket. I lost count of how many times she told me she loved me that afternoon, as well as how many times she'd asked if I loved her, how many times I'd reassured her that I did. Seeing her smile, her happiness, on her gravestone, hit me a bit harder than I expected. My heart ached at the sight of it. Maybe I deserved that. There were already bouquets of red and white roses lying before the stone, proof that someone, if not her parents, had been to visit recently. I set the forget-me-nots among them and took a step back with tears rimming my eyes. I was quiet for a long while, just looking down at the grave and not really believing that she was really gone, that she could really take her own life. Finally, I took a slow, deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, Jennifer." I told her I was sorry I hurt her. I told her I was sorry she was gone. I told her I wished I could have helped her. But I never knew how hard the breakup really was on her. All I'd ever known was that she'd said she loved me and begged me not to end things. But I was going to college, and didn't believe a long-distance relationship would work. I'd tried to explain that it was best for both of us, but she just wouldn't listen. I said goodbye, and I went home. Home, sweet home. Amy was already back home when I got there, sitting at the kitchen table and clipping coupons. My heart warmed when I saw her, and then I felt a pang of guilt. I did my best to ignore it as she greeted me with a kiss. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Had a few things to take care of." I felt bad not being completely honest with her, but again, I didn't want her to have to bear my burden. Thankfully, she didn't press me, and we went about our day. We had some lunch, watched some TV, had a nice dinner, and then went to bed. That night, I had a nightmare. I was back at the cemetery. The moon was full and low in the sky. It seemed to light the whole place, all except for Jen's grave. I was in the clothes I wore to bed, a t-shirt and boxers, and shivered when a chilly wind blew through the leaves. The flowers I'd left were already dead, and when I looked at Jen's picture on her headstone, it was different. Not the one I'd taken, but one with her looking sadly off to one side. I looked down, and the ground seemed to be moving. At first I thought it was just overgrown grass blowing in the breeze, but when the weeping willow's branches briefly parted and the moonlight came through, I saw that it wasn't grass, but worms, long and shiny, wriggling up through the earth. I staggered back a step, and when I looked at the headstone, it had changed again. This time, I could see that Jen was in a bathtub, with murky water barely keeping her modest. The wind gusted, nearly knocking me to the ground. I managed to stay upright, but stumbled forward and felt my right foot sink into the earth. I instantly felt the cold sliminess of writhing worms all around my bare ankle. When I tried to pull free, I couldn't budge. An unnatural suction seemed to hold me in place, and however I tried, I couldn't tug free. I looked all around for some leverage, low-hanging branches or nearby headstones to grab onto, but there was nothing within reach. Struggling to keep my balance, I looked back to Jen's picture once more. What I saw then was horrible. The scene was the same, but it wasn't. There was more to it than before. Jennifer was lying motionless in the bathtub, and I could see why the water was murky. On either of her forearms was a long, thin gash. Thick streams of blood ran from each one and down the sides of the tub into the water. Susie hadn't told me how Jen had killed herself, but somehow I knew that was it. That's when the wind began to howl, and this time when it gusted, I was thrown to the ground face first. When I tried to catch myself, my arms plunged wrist deep into the bed of worms. I immediately tried pushing myself back up and slipped in deeper. I struggled, and I could swear the wind wasn't just howling through the trees. It was howling my name. I awoke with a gasp and shot up in bed. It was dark, but I stared at my hands for several seconds, straining to see the cold, slimy worms I was certain were still on me. When my eyes finally adjusted, I saw nothing was there, and got up to get a drink of water. Amy must have been tired because she managed to sleep through my commotion, and I was careful getting back into bed to keep from disturbing her. I must have lain awake for a good half hour before eventually drifting back to sleep. The wind had picked up outside, and if I really listened, I could still hear my name being called. couple days went by, and I wasn't feeling great. I was normally a morning person, but I'd been having restless nights. When I rolled over in bed and tried to pull my beautiful wife in for a snuggle, she wasn't there. At first, I figured she was in the bathroom, but when I cracked my eyes and saw the mid-morning sun outside our bedroom window, I checked the time. I'd overslept by a few hours. Luckily, I hadn't started my new job at the local paper yet. That was going to be the following Monday, so I wasn't late for anything. Still, it wasn't like me to sleep in, especially not by several hours. I got up and managed a shower, then joined Amy downstairs for some lunch. "Why'd you let me sleep in so late?" I asked. "You looked like you needed it," she answered with a grin. I'll admit, my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like hell. We chatted over a nice plate of finger sandwiches. I managed to eat, but the whole time I felt fatigued, and I couldn't concentrate on anything Amy was saying. I guess she'd noticed my half of the conversation was lacking, because she asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine, that it was just a headache. She took my plate and gave me a kiss on the forehead. "Maybe you should go back to bed." Not normally the type to take a nap in the middle of the day, I reluctantly agreed. By the time my head hit the pillow, I could barely keep my eyes open. I was just about to drift off when I felt Amy climb onto her side of the bed. She caressed my forehead with a soft, cool hand. The next morning, I managed to pull myself out of bed by a more reasonable hour. I still felt like hell, but put on my best fake smile when I greeted Amy with a kiss at the bathroom sink. She'd just finished brushing her teeth. "How do you feel?" she asked with a smile. I wrapped my arms around her. "I'm okay." When I thanked her for taking care of me the previous evening, she looked at me funny. I stayed downstairs after you came up. I didn't see you again until later when I came to bed. You were fast asleep." I was puzzled. Maybe I had just dreamed her caressing my head. I said as much, and we laughed about it, had another kiss, and then went about the day. My first day working at the paper went fairly well, despite feeling a bit exhausted by bad sleep. The owner, Mr. Sanders, was an old friend of my dad's and was easy enough to get along with. I also knew a couple of my new co-workers, Paula and Vince, from school and growing up. When lunchtime rolled around, we'd had a chance to catch up, and of course, the topic of Jennifer came up. When they asked if I'd heard, I said yes, and told them how Susie had been the one to tell me. When I said we'd had a nice conversation, they seemed a bit surprised. I asked why, and they told me that, apparently, Susie hadn't been shy about telling people it was my fault that Jen had killed herself. My heart sank to hear that, and I thought back to Susie's visit. She hadn't given any sign that she blamed me, or seemed to hold anything against me for what happened. If what they said was true, then Susie must have eventually realized I wasn't to blame and forgiven me. The rest of the workday had gone by fast, and I hadn't thought any more about Susie or Jen. By the time I got home, I couldn't wait to tell Amy about my first day. When I walked into the house, I called out to her. When she didn't answer right away, I looked for her in the kitchen. She wasn't there, so I started up the stairs. When I called out again, she answered me from the bedroom. As I went, I started telling about my day, how much I enjoyed it, and got to catch up with some old friends from school. When I got to the bedroom door, I froze. Amy was sitting on the edge of the bed holding the framed photo of Jennifer. We were both quiet for several moments as I approached her. Finally, she looked up at me, confusion on her pretty face. "Who is this, Greg?" I still didn't want to tell her, but I couldn't lie to her about it either. So I sat down, took a deep breath, and explained the situation. Thankfully, I married a wonderful woman. Amy took in the whole story, then handed the picture to me. I asked her how she felt, knowing the circumstances of Jen's death, and she told me she was sorry that things had happened the way they did. She also told me that I couldn't blame myself. "As tragic as it isn't your fault, Greg." She gave my hand a loving squeeze. It's nobody's fault. I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. When I knelt down to pull my footlocker out from under the bed and put the picture back, I asked Amy what she had been looking for when she found it. I got some dirt on my top working in the garden. I came in to change when I finished. I laughed. Why were you looking for a top in my footlocker? When I looked up at her, she seemed confused. What? Greg, when I came into the bedroom, the picture was sitting on your nightstand. I never touched the footlocker. I felt a shiver at her words and looked down at the picture. Remembering the nightmare I had after visiting Jennifer's grave, I almost expected it to change. Of course it didn't, so I set it back into the footlocker, closed and latched the lid, then put it back under the bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of wind blowing through the trees outside. I didn't think anything of it at first, and when Amy spooned me, hooking her arm around my chest, I took her hand in mine. I shivered slightly at the touch of her cool skin. Should I turn up the heat? I asked with a yawn. She didn't answer, but squeezed my hand as she snuggled me. I smiled. Okay, I'll keep you warm. I blinked heavily several times and then closed my eyes again. I was just about to nod off when I heard the click of the bathroom light from down the hall. My eyes snapped open, and I saw Amy walking tiredly back toward me. Every hair on my body stood on end as I shook free of the cold hand and jumped out of bed. I was at the light switch in a flash, and as soon as it was flipped, my eyes searched the room wildly. There was no one else in the bed, or anywhere else that I could see. When Amy popped into the doorway and asked what I was doing, I almost screamed. She must have seen how shaken I was, because she put her hands, her warm hands, on my face and asked, "What's wrong?" I didn't know what to tell her. I had been holding someone's hand, I was sure of it. But I told her the only thing I thought would make sense. I had a nightmare. She hugged me and kissed me, and I'll admit, it made me feel a little better. In my wife's embrace, I looked warily about the bedroom, wondering what the hell I'd just experienced. When Amy looked up at me and asked if I was okay, I lied and told her I was fine. She led me back to bed and climbed in. I joined her, and as she rested her head on my chest, I remembered my nightmare again. Listening to the wind outside, I wondered if I would hear it calling my name. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes the next morning was Jennifer. It took a moment to register, but when I realized the photo was sitting on my nightstand facing me, my flesh started to prickle. I could hear Amy breathing softly behind me, and part of me wondered if it was really her. Would I see her coming out of the bathroom again, or maybe stepping off the landing at the top of the stairs? I resisted the urge to leap out of bed and see who I was sleeping with. Instead, I sat up slowly, got quietly out of bed. I turned to see my beautiful wife still soundly asleep. Kneeling, I took the picture from the nightstand and replaced it in the footlocker. Amy was having breakfast by the time I was ready to leave for work. She asked if I wanted to join her, but I said I'd grab something on the way. Truthfully, I had no appetite, so I kissed her goodbye and I left. I didn't mention the photo. I was distracted at work. I still wasn't sleeping very well, and I still didn't have much of an appetite at lunchtime, though I managed to eat a bite. I confided in Paula and Vince about the nightmare, the odd things that had happened with the photo, and the hand I'd been holding in bed. They'd laughed and joked that maybe Jennifer was haunting me. I laughed too, because I'd never really believed in that kind of thing, but something about the idea unnerved me, and the rest of the day I couldn't help but wonder. I made a detour after work. I hadn't planned on going back to the cemetery, but after the conversation at lunch, I figured maybe, just maybe, If there was something unnatural going on, I could do something about it. I had no flowers this time. When I got to Jennifer's grave, the roses and the forget-me-nots were gone, likely picked up by a caretaker or simply blown away. I felt nervous, so I stuck my hands in my pockets. Jen. As soon as I spoke, a breeze kicked up. Jennifer, I don't know if this is crazy or if you're really... how to phrase it. If you're still around, if you're haunting me, please, Jen, please, just stop. The breeze died down, and in the back of my mind I crazily thought maybe she really was around, and she was hearing me. I loved you, Jennifer, but... My words caught in my throat when the wind gusted, nearly knocking me over, just like in my nightmare. In all honesty, I was afraid. The conversation with Vince and Paula, along with the things that had happened, had me rattled. But I had to do something, even if I was just a crazy guy talking to the wind in a graveyard. I loved you, but that's all in the past. I moved on, Jen, and I hope you can too. The breeze waned again, and I took a steadying breath, then walked over to the headstone. I knelt down and placed a hand on it for just a moment, looking at the photo. I'm happy, I said. Please be happy for me. The breeze rustled lightly through the leaves of the willow, cool and soothing. Once again, I said goodbye, and then went home to my wife. Amy was in the kitchen chopping carrots for dinner when I got home. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her shoulder. You're late, she said. Sorry. She stopped chopping and turned to me. Important business? Nope, I said, just running late. She raised an eyebrow and then smiled as she kissed me. You know, you're lucky I'm not the suspicious type. I laughed. Believe me, I know how lucky I am. We shared another kiss before she turned back to her carrots. Why don't you get cleaned up, and then you can tell me all about your day while I finish dinner? Yes, ma'am, I said, giving her a squeeze before heading upstairs for a quick shower. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I caught the mouth-watering aroma of homemade beef stew, my favorite comfort food. Amy was an excellent cook, and with a spring in my step, despite some remaining fatigue, I went to the bedroom to finish toweling off and get dressed. As I entered, I caught something in the corner of my eye. I almost didn't stop for a second look, but the object was in the vicinity of the nightstand. As I turned, I felt my stomach knotting. No. The picture was out of the footlocker again, this time facing away from the bed, toward me. I immediately told myself that Amy must have put it up, maybe out of guilt or something, but I knew better. She would have left that decision to me. I told you, I'm happy. I moved toward the nightstand and reached for the picture. I couldn't believe my eyes when it flew off the corner of the nightstand, right at my head. I managed to duck out of the way and it hit the wall, falling in pieces to the floor. I knelt down to examine it. The frame broke into pieces and the glass shattered. I half expected them to move again as I began to clear away the debris, but they didn't. As I picked up bits of broken glass and plastic, I saw that there was something on the back of the photo. My heart skipped a beat. The words "Forget Me Not" had been smeared on crudely in what looked like blood. I rushed down the stairs and into the kitchen. I'd folded the picture and stuffed it down into my pocket. Hey there, Amy said with a smile. Dinner's almost ready. Great. Do we, have any wine? I knew we didn't. We drank the last we had on our first night in our new home. Amy thought for a moment and started to answer. Why don't I pop out and get a bottle? I interrupted, smiling. Well, I won't be long, I said, and gave my wife a kiss. Okay, she giggled. Bye, love you. I called back the sentiment as I walked out the front door. I pushed the speed limit all the way to Jen's parents' house. It was a windy night, and the what-if part of my mind said it was more than just a late winter breeze. I pulled up in front of the 2-story Victorian and thought about what I would say. I didn't want to just barge in aggressively, but I needed to talk to Susie. For just an instant, I was sure I'd heard my name in the wind, and a heavy gust rocked the car. I got out and jogged up to the front door, trying to keep from being blown over. I reached the small porch and rang the doorbell, taking what cover I could from the elements. When there was no answer, I rang again. It was only a moment before the door swung slowly open. "Hi, Gregor." I asked if I could come in, and Susie stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. The foyer was dark. From what I could see, the whole house was dark, but there was a flickering glow of fire coming from the den. I heard the front door click shut behind me and turned to Susie. In the shadows, I couldn't tell if she was smiling or smirking. "Good to see you again, Susie." "Is it?" she said. I wasn't sure, but I followed her into the den. She told me to make myself at home and went to stand by the fireplace with her back to me. I chose to stand, feeling vulnerable in the darkened room. "So," I said nervously, "are your parents home?" "Upstairs." "How are they?" I asked. "Daddy had a stroke after Jennifer." She glanced over her shoulder at me. "Mom drinks a lot these days." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" I sighed. Of course I was sorry. I never meant for anything bad to happen to Jennifer. To anyone. She shrugged. "What is it they say about good intentions?" I pulled the folded photo from my pocket. "Is that why you gave me this?" I asked, holding it out to her. Finally, she turned to face me. "I told you, Gregor. Jenny would have wanted you to have it." I couldn't see her face with the fire at her back. "I know because I found it on the bathroom floor. When I found her." My heart sank. Susie hadn't told me before that she was the one who found Jennifer. "Susie, I have to think. You were probably the last thing she thought of. Lying there, dying, writing that on her favorite picture, in her own blood." She turned away again. "And now you get to keep your promise." I moved to join her by the fire. "My promise?" Susie turned to look at me. This time I could see her smirk by the firelight. "Your promise to never forget." I hated that my actions caused so much pain for someone I once loved, but the way Susanna was looking at me made me more angry than sad. I looked down at the folded photo in my hand, then dropped it into the licking flames. "I've said my goodbyes." As I turned and headed for the foyer, for the door, I heard Susanna cluck her tongue. "She won't be happy about that, Gregor." Her words gave me a chill, but I didn't look back. Amy turned to me as I walked into the dining room. I held up a bottle of Cabernet. "Not easy to come by in a small town," I said with a chuckle. She smiled. "My hero." Dinner was great, as I knew it would be. Amy's cooking was probably one of the many reasons I fell in love with her. The conversation was another. We always had something to talk about, and we had a great talk over dinner. I talked about work and how well it was going. Amy told me how the garden was coming along. Neither of us mentioned any of the recent odd happenings as we laughed, toasted, and drank wine. After dinner, Amy put away leftovers and I put the dishes in the sink to soak overnight. We went to bed and made love, and then fell asleep in each other's arms. I wasn't expecting another nightmare. It was like before, but also different. I was naked in the graveyard, standing in front of Jen's grave, but the photo was scorched across the shadowed part of her face. The wind was blowing, and I could hear a voice, a feminine voice, calling to me. The ground over the grave was a mass of slimy worms, writhing and wriggling in the moonlight. And when the wind gusted, I stumbled into them. My feet sank in, and when I tried to pull myself free, the wind knocked me over. My arms slipped into the worms, and the harder I tried to push myself up, the deeper my arms sunk, until I was in up to my elbows. When I looked down, the pulsating mass began to part. Before my eyes, a pale, lifeless face began to emerge. I tried desperately to escape, but I was stuck. When I looked back down, I saw that the face was Jennifer's, but not as it had been when I saw her dead in the bathtub. Now she wore a terrible scowl, and her eyes, once a pale, beautiful blue, were two black, lifeless holes. I had no breath to scream, though I wanted to with all my being. I could only stare into those black holes, mere inches from my own, certain that my heart would stop dead in my chest. When I woke, I was covered in sweat and chilled to the bone. My eyes, wide and terrified, searched the bedroom from the shadows in the corners to the darkened doorway. My pulse was pounding, and my heart was in my throat, but as I realized it had only been a dream, I started to calm. I nearly screamed when I heard a click and saw light spill out of the bathroom and into the hall from the corner of my eye. When I realized it was just Amy, I chuckled hoarsely. Then I looked over to her side of the bed, where she was soundly sleeping. For just a moment, I lay in confusion, my tired mind trying to rationalize. I'd almost managed to convince myself that one of us had simply forgotten to turn off the light before bed, but I knew that I'd just heard the click, just seen the sudden brightness of the light coming on moments before. I looked out into the hall, to the trapezoid of light mere feet away, and a pit of dread began to grow in my stomach. Outside, the wind was blowing, and in the back of my mind I heard the ghostly female voice calling my name. I knew I had to go turn the light off. I had to prove that it was all in my head. I had moved on, and my life, with Amy, was my own. Still covered in cooling sweat, I had to take several shaky, calming breaths. When I slipped my legs over the side of the bed to stand, I was unsteady, both fear and fatigue taking their toll. I kept one hand on the edge of the nightstand as I moved toward the door. When I looked back at Amy and saw her sleeping so peacefully, I told myself that everything was okay. It was just a bad dream. Once I could stand under my own power, I stepped out into the hall. As soon as I did, I could swear the wind outside picked up, gusting hard enough to make the house creak on its frame. With each step, I was less certain of my conviction. The bathroom door was almost within reach, but it seemed to take forever to reach it. When I was standing just outside the box of light that reached out into the hallway, I stopped to take several calming breaths. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the door jamb, pulling myself into view of the smallish, brightly lit room. All the air left me. I couldn't have screamed if I wanted to, and I wanted to. Jennifer was in the bathtub, her pale, scowling face looking up at me, her dead black eyes locked on me, just like she had been in the picture that couldn't have possibly existed. She had one arm up on the side of the tub, and her crimson blood painted it in stark contrast to the clean white metal. I tried to scream as I staggered back, but it came out as a series of hoarse barks. When I felt the rail that runs along the staircase at my lower back, I tried to stop myself, but it was too late. I instantly felt a brief weightlessness as I teetered over it. I flailed, trying to catch myself, but there was nothing to grab onto. Twisting in the air, I hoped to try and direct myself to a safe landing, but when I felt an immense pain shoot through my spine, I knew I'd failed. I hit the stairs just below the halfway mark, easily a good 10 feet down, then tumbled limply to the landing below. My pulse was pounding in my head, but I could still hear Amy getting out of bed, calling to me from above. "Greg?" I tried to answer her through my grimace and couldn't. When I tried to push myself up, I realized I couldn't move my legs. Seconds later, I heard a gasp. Amy must have peered over the banister and seen me lying there, followed by the sound of her hurrying down the stairs. "Oh my God, Greg, what happened?" I looked up at her through tears, still unable to speak. As she knelt down beside me, I noticed something over her shoulder. Sitting at the top of the stairs, leaning casually against the newel post, was Jennifer. She still looked lifeless, and dripped with blood-tinged bathwater, as if someone had just posed her, but she gazed at me angrily, her nothingness eyes piercing into me. I wanted to scream as terror welled inside of me, but I couldn't. Instead, I closed my eyes so tightly they ached. "Come on, let's get you up," Amy said as she slipped an arm around me. It didn't take her long to figure out there was something seriously wrong. While she went to call for help, I had no choice but to lie there in excruciating pain, blind by my own choosing and mute save for various grunts and groans. The doctors say the paralysis could go away, and I could regain some function. No promises, though. Honestly, it wouldn't be so bad, if not for Jennifer. She's always here now. Her angry, lifeless eyes are always gazing right at me. When Amy bathes me, Jen is here. When Amy tries to be romantic, Jen is here. When I sleep, Jen is here. That's the worst. Even though I know Amy is the one who is lying beside me, all I can see is Jennifer's deathly eyes piercing into me all night long. She'll never let me forget her.